I'm absolutely delighted that we have as a guest today Ron Kuby. Was actually on my radio show when I had a radio show, like 2 or 3 times, and he was always very interesting. And he reminded me the last time that he was in the movie, not physically, but if anybody remembers the movie The Great Lebowski, there's a scene that it says, "Get me Ron Kuby." So here he is. And one of the things that we have really strived to do is to create some kind of balance. And lately, we've had a number, not a large number, a number of conservative people. And
How crazy were they, Judge? I mean, give me a sense of what you consider to be conservative, because that covers a lot of territory from, William F. Buckley Jr. to like people who were absolutely nuts like Bobby Kennedy Jr.
So, okay, we interviewed Bobby Kennedy Jr.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
And I thought, this was before, I think he was still running for president at the time. And I thought it was a very, very interesting interview. He talked about Fauci and stuff, and there was a lot of true facts in it. I read his book.
Actually, Judge, but we'll debate that another time. Almost nothing that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says about medicine, a subject which he really knows almost nothing about, is considered to be true by virtue of the scientific consensus. But we can move on.
Well, but you mentioned a very interesting point, because since the time we last spoke, so much has happened in the world. We've changed administrations, obviously. We have a situation in foreign policy that is very different. We're looking at a different economy. We're looking at immigration. We're looking at a lot of issues that are not the same. And conservatives then are not really the same as the conservatives now. And the same thing goes on the left side. In fact, I remember you saying that you were to the left of the liberals. And so, because I had conservatives, I wanted to have a, quote, liberal. And you were in. So tell me what's your definition of conservative and liberal?
I look at people who are on the left side of the spectrum, which is me, and the right side of the spectrum. I think words like liberal or progressive, or the weaponized word woke. I don't think these things are particularly useful. It's a question of what you're for and what it is that you're against. I believe in rigorous factual presentations. I believe in scientific inquiry. I believe in the actual rule of law as defined by the courts of the United States of America, even if I disagree with them. I believe that because I was born in America, I won the birth lottery, giving me all kinds of opportunities that I did not earn. And I'm anxious to extend those opportunities to other people. I don't think imprisoning people is a good solution to most of societal problems. I did support defense of the Ukraine, which of course has been abandoned by this administration. But I oppose most of the recent wars that America has been involved in as not just bad for the people we're killing, but really kind of bad for us as well. I support the right of dissidents to engage in nonviolent civil disobedience. And I could go on and on. These are the things I believe. Now, you can call them whatever you want. I believe in racial justice. I believe our society is better when a diversity of people, not just racially, but that too, culturally, ethnically, gender, are represented in positions of power, because they represent us, the people, and different people have very different experiences. And I could go on and on, but you get the idea. I don't really care what you call it.
Well, I think for the few people who don't know who you are, most people do, give us a little bio. Tell us, because I know what you've done before and it's been exemplary, but the people don't know. So tell them who you are, and then we'll talk about the subject matters.
All right. I was born at a very young age. I grew up in, I left home when I was pretty young. I traveled around. I worked on the tugboats down in St. Croix as a merchant seaman back when I was 17, 18 years old. I ended up going to college at the University of Kansas. No elitist that, right? And
Had a good basketball team.
Yeah. Good basketball team and a rich historical tradition. The Jayhawks, as you remember, before they were a stupid cartoon mascot, were the anti-slavery forces in the 1850s that would defend Free State Kansas against the border ruffians over there in Missouri. But I digress. I went to law school at Cornell. I went to work for the great legendary civil rights lawyer William Kunstler, and we spent the rest of his life representing the downtrodden, the poor, the oppressed, the dissidents of various types. I continued to do that after Kunstler died. I represent a lot of protesters these days. I represent a lot of people who have served a lot of time who were actually factually innocent of their crimes, and a lot of other defense of the unpopular overall. So in a nutshell, that's it.
Well, I kind of remember the trial of the Chicago 7. That's what you had to do with that, if anything.
To do with it. I was like 12 years old at the time. It's funny. Kunstler was around for so long, and I have now been around for so long. People's recollections put me into situations that I not only don't I remember being there, because look, we're at the age where we start to forget things, but I know I couldn't be there because, I wasn't a lawyer when I was 12 years old.
But I know you have defended some very unpopular people, and somehow that tends to cast aspersions on you as an individual. And I know that's not what your purpose is, but the reality is we as lawyers oftentimes are compared to our clients. And in your case, you had some terrible clients.
Well, I had some great clients, frankly. Many people who were involved in dissident activities that I loved and respected. And oftentimes I did identify with my clients. I didn't mind being identified with them. Funny thing happens over the passage of time, though, Judge, which is people who used to hate me 20, 30, 40 years ago, when they look back on that time, they look back on their lives at that time, as you yourself have noted, they look back at it with much rosier view than it actually was, a much happier time than it really was. And they see me there. And I was a part of their happier time. So they don't hate me as much now as they did then. And that's progress.
Well, I was just telling you before we went on camera that I saw a bumper sticker not too long ago, actually, that said, the older I get, the smarter I was, or the better I was. And it's really true. Now that we're looking at the chaos in the world, and it is chaotic, many of us who are my age, at least, go back to the 50s and say, that was a good time. We were kind of uncomplicated. We didn't have instant gratification. You had to work for the things that you got. There weren't the same kind of giveaways. We got along a whole lot better. I come from a small town, 6,500 people.
And you had legalized segregation, the complete disenfranchisement of Black people. You had the continuation of Plessy versus Ferguson, and then de facto segregation. After that, you had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the rise of the civil rights movement that was met with lynchings and the most outrageous types of violence imaginable. But yeah, for a lot of people, and I know that was not your experience looking back now, but that's what the 50s and 60s were. You had the Bay of Pigs. You had the beginning of the war in Vietnam. You had overthrows of all kinds of democratically elected governments by the United States. You had a rogue CIA. The good old days, Your Honor.
Well, I was beginning to say, I come from a small town, 6,500 people. And of course, we all knew each other pretty much. You didn't lock the doors. We didn't have sidewalks. It was pretty nice and peaceful, I suppose. And I used to see people wearing the button, I like Ike, referring to Eisenhower. there was a certain kind of laissez-faire that went along with some of the traumatic events you described, for sure. But if you compare then to now, and even though we've made a lot of progress in the area of civil rights and otherwise, we still have taken away whatever rights of privacy we used to have. We don't have that anymore. There's no such thing as the right of privacy. And the explanation is, if you got a camera on every street corner, the argument is always, but it's good because we catch criminals. But nobody ever talks about the other side of the coin, which is Big Brother is really watching you. 1984 is right now.
The right, what you call the right to privacy, just as a legal matter, as a constitutional matter, has been defined now for, gosh, I think 50 years as not including anything that you make public. So if you have reasonable expectations of privacy, you have reasonable expectation of privacy in your home, and that is still sacrosanct, save for obtaining a search warrant. You have other places where you have reasonable expectations of privacy, where you don't intend to be public. But unfortunately, for better or for worse, when you are in public, you have no right to privacy. So yeah, there are cameras there. There's closed circuit television there. As a matter of policy, I would rather live without them, but it's not an intrusion into any right. And unfortunately, one of the things that I found people doing frequently on the right wing, but also on the left, is imagining rights that don't actually exist. Like, you have a right to be protected from what you call hate speech. No, you don't. You have a right to be protected from actions, physicality, stalking behavior, but you don't have a right to have somebody prosecuted or even have their visa denied or their green card revoked because you find what they have to say hateful. Well, actually, do as of the past couple of weeks, but that wasn't true.
Well, I'm sure that when it comes to the discussion about immigration, I can sense, knowing who you are, of course, that what side of it you are. And the question really is, have we gone too far? Because the arguments that are being made is very innocent people are being punished for things that seem to be too far remote. But the reality is we don't have a border crisis anymore. I'm not saying he did the right thing. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican.
You're assuming, you make the assumption that there was a, quote, border crisis to begin with. And
you don't think so?
You're right. We don't have it anymore. What we did have in the Biden administration was a large number of people, although still a very small percentage overall, a large number of people who were seeking political asylum in the United States, claiming, sometimes truthfully, sometimes not, that they had this tremendous fear of persecution because of their sexuality, their sexual orientation, their refusal to join a gang, their political affiliations, all kinds of reasons to seek asylum that the United States has been willing to accommodate ever since that bad bit of business in Europe in the 30s and 40s with that guy with the mustache and the genocide. So we decided that would never happen again, and we made sure that people who have claims of political asylum have those claims properly heard and adjudicated, and those were most of the people that President Biden had let into the country. So I don't think there was a crisis. What I think there was just, sort of typical jingoistic, racist, right-wing demagoguery that we have seen time after time, generation after generation. If it's not, 100 years ago, it was the immigrants, the Hungarians and the Greeks and the questionable Jews, none of whom actually knew what America was. They had no fidelity to principles of democracy. That was 100 freaking years ago, 150 years ago, after the Chinese built the railroads. We made sure we didn't allow them back in. We had, the demagoguing of the communist menace. And then after 9/11, the Muslims were coming. They were going to impose Sharia law. We have to do something. All of this lather, rinse, repeat to instill division and fear and hatred in the American people. And you know what? It worked pretty much as well as it frequently does. We elected Donald Trump on this virulently anti-immigrant platform. And he has been busy not just rounding up people who were here legally till he canceled their legal status, but not affording basic principles of due process. And of course, the irony of all of this is, because I keep in touch with some of the right wing, and one of the memes that was going around immigration was no process coming in, no process going out. Seems right. You didn't follow the rules coming into our country. We're not going to follow any rules, kicking your ass up. It's like, okay, well, one of the reasons we have due process is to make sure that the person we're kicking out of our country, in fact, is here illegally, is the person we claim they are, and not just some person who has gotten caught up in this grinding machinery. And we've seen a lot of the latter these days.
Well, that's talking about extremes, of course. And the reality is, I don't think you're a big fan of President Trump. And from what I can tell.
But it's not who he is. Again, it's what he stands for, what he appeals to, and the type of policies that he's implementing, which run so counter to at least the spirit and the ideals of America. And if his name were something else, I would feel the same way. So sort of personalizing it, you just hate Trump, is just like another talking point to avoid engaging with the issues of what he is actually doing or not doing.
Okay, let's be a little bit more specific now. When you look at the election results, this will be debated forever, I suppose, why the Democrats lost. And part of it had to do with the selection, who they picked as the candidate. But there were other issues that go along with it. And you used the word before, and it's used every day in the press, woke. Do you think that people were reacting negatively to what they perceived was woke?
Well, you know what? It's hard for me to know what other people are thinking, right? It takes me, a while to just figure out at this point what I'm thinking. But I will tell you, the ads that I saw, the speeches I listened to, the campaign that I saw from the Trump Vance group was focused on one, immigration, making the vilest and completely untrue claims about immigrants. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, just crazy ass stuff, which, a generation ago, that would be your uncle at the end of the table. And maybe you like him, maybe you don't, but he's always saying stuff like that. So they focused on demonizing immigrants. They certainly focused on everything they called, quote unquote, woke, which is everything from civil rights laws, generally voting rights laws, promoting diversity in the workplace, to transgender rights. Certainly the most pointed attacks that I saw were against transgendered people, because most Americans don't know transgendered people. Those that don't have people in their family or acquaintance group sort of like think they're just weird and potentially dangerous and somehow unnatural. And that's something that, of course, the right wing has repeatedly fed into. Yeah, they're going to get in your bathroom and rape your little girls, kinds of other stuff that doesn't happen. But but certainly they appealed that appeal to a large swath of the electorate that at least claims to remember back when we could tell the ACs from the DCs and there wasn't anything in between, Judge.
Well, that's another area, of course,
Right.
that they emphasize. But let's look at the left side of it. Everybody has their own opinion, of course. Some people say that the left lost because they were too far to the left. And I know you're pretty far to the left. So I wanted to get your view on some of these things, which,
So
of course, you're giving us.
I think the Democrats lost because the Republicans had a much clearer and far more emotionally powerful message than the Democrats had. And it's a message that resonated deep in the fearful souls of so many of the American people. Could the Democrats have done better? Yeah, obviously. They could have started with Joe Biden not running for a second term.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
Contested primary where the American people got to see and got to know various candidates. Maybe the Dems would have picked Kamala Harris. Maybe they wouldn't have. But at least by the time that decision was being made, all of the candidates would have been sort of well-known items with their strengths and their weaknesses, exposed in a way that just didn't happen here.
Do you think that hiding Biden's dementia played any kind of role in the outcome?
Well, I think it played a huge role because ultimately it forced him to leave the race with only a handful of weeks left to spare. Had he not run again, things would have been very different in terms of the campaign. Whether the outcome would have been different, I don't know. Again, Trump has always been very good, and the people around him have always been very good at finding targets, naming them, mocking them, claiming they are trying to do us all in, and asserting that we will be protected from those people, insert name here, once you elect the Republicans. It's always been a good playbook for the right wing, whether the right wing were Democrats or Republicans. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Dixiecrats, right? It's always been a great playbook, and it remains a great playbook, which says something profoundly disturbing about the American people. But
well, don't you think it made an impression when the Democratic Party, without a primary, without any real inquiry, picked somebody that they thought would win the election, and the public really had no input in that selection? In fact, I was talking to people last night who were talking about the governor of Pennsylvania, Shapiro, and they're saying
Shapiro didn't even, look. I think everything that could have been done wrong around candidate selection was done wrong from the beginning. Kamala Harris quickly won support pretty much of everybody in the Democratic Party really fast. She consolidated support really fast. She raised a ginormous amount of money. And she was running, and she had a real bounce in the campaign in its first few weeks. Unfortunately, it was hard to start to develop a policy platform outside of Campaign of Joy, which is not going to compete with "they're coming to get us all. They're coming to turn your boys into girls and then force them to get abortions." Right? Campaign of Joy doesn't really stand up to that. So, look, I have a place in Pennsylvania where I don't vote there. My wife lives out there, and she's a resident there. Don't know that Josh Shapiro would have done any better against Donald Trump. He certainly would have not left himself open to being attacked as a closet supporter of Hamas, as Harris was by the more extreme elements, despite the fact that Joe Biden, or as I like to call him, Genocide Joe, did everything he possibly could to enable the slaughter of the Palestinian people by Israel up until the last day he left office. It still didn't protect Kamala from being attacked. And that Shapiro, I guess, would not have faced that. But, he would have faced other things.
Well, you mentioned the Middle East, obviously, right now. What's your view on the current situation as a very liberal left progressive?
Hopeless, absolutely hopeless. However this plays out in the short term, you will have created, it'll be at least 2 generations before the Palestinian people and the Arab people are willing to even consider living in peace with the state of Israel. It will take that long for these scars of mass murder to heal, if they ever do. So, I'm hopeless. I lived in Israel for a while. I actually, because I'm a big fan of international law, I believe that Israel has a legal right to exist as set forth by the United Nations Declaration that created the state of Israel by majority vote of the General Assembly. Also created a Palestinian state as well, but that only lasted about half an hour.
Until the Arabs invaded Israel. Maybe.
Well, again, the Arabs. The problem with referring to the Arabs is the same problem of referring to the Jews or the blacks. It's not a single thing, although the Zionists in America have done their best to collapse all distinctions among Muslim, Arab, and Persian, and Turkish people and Malaysian people into all one giant them. But that was an opportunity clearly lost in 48, never regained. And I think that there's just going to be more slaughter and conquest by the state of Israel for, certainly well beyond my lifetime, yours, my daughter's lifetime.
Well, we had as a guest, in fact, several times, Alan Dershowitz.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Alan. Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm going to let you say what you think because I saw your expression.
No, look, I've worked with Alan, and I actually personally kind of like Alan, or at least I did before he totally lost his mind in what I consider to be an unfortunate desire to stay relevant. And for Dersh, staying relevant means being on cable television. And unfortunately, the only way he could get there was by embracing a right wing that totally at odds with what would have been his historical legacy. And Dershowitz has always been a big supporter of Israel, has always been an apologist for Israel, has always rushed forward to defend Israel against all criticisms, has hastened to demonize people who speak out against Israel, and that's fine. That's his position. He's certainly entitled to take it, but whatever.
Would you describe yourself as pro-Palestinian?
I mean, sure, but again, like all of these labels, what does that mean? Pro-Palestinian runs the gamut, in my view, from where I am, recognizing the lawful existence of the state of Israel, but also recognizing that the Palestinian people have the same right that created Israel. They have the same right to their own state, which is being denied to them by the Israeli occupation and the ongoing slaughter. From that position all the way to being pro-Palestinian, like Hamas or Hitler. Yes, I like the Arabs. I didn't like the Jews. We know that, Adolf.
Well,
much. I mean,
let
again,
me ask you a question, a definition question.
Yeah.
What factual basis supports the conclusion that there's such a thing as the Palestinian people? If you look at history and you look at the facts, there's no such thing. How do you create it?
Well, that I mean, again, the trouble with quote, looking at the quote unquote facts, I don't know what facts you're talking about.
There's no Palestinian state. There's no Palestinian people.
There was never a Palestinian state. There was always a pre-Islamic people who were not Jews who lived in biblical Palestine. Many of them actually descendants from the original indigenous people who were neither Arabs nor Jews, but were Canaanites, if you want to go back that far. And we can move forward through time to today. The problem with these historical arguments, I just wanted to correct that factually, there's always been a Palestinian people. Now, was there a Palestinian sense of nationhood in Palestine? For the most part, no. I mean, that was very much a 19th century creation, just like the sense of Jewish nationhood in Palestine was a 19th century creation. The problem with all of these historical arguments is they don't really inform what to do now. And we can argue endlessly as to whether the 1937 Hebron massacre set the stage for the Zionist murders in 1948 or not, whatever. It doesn't take us to a place where we can resolve problems if we're constantly arguing about what happened in the past.
Do you believe that the state of Israel is committing genocide today?
Not under the technical legal definition of genocide. Which is why I just referred to as mass murder, slaughter, war crimes, using hunger and thirst as unlawful weapons of war as outlawed by the Geneva Convention, targeting civilian infrastructure, I could go on and on. I think.
How about hospitals? Right, you think shooting at hospitals makes sense?
What's that?
You think shooting at the hospitals with missiles like Iran is doing now is legitimate?
Israel's destruction of hospitals. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, look, Iran said, hey, it was an accident. We weren't aiming there. We were aiming at a military facility that was close by. There apparently was a military facility close by. And Iran actually went on to say the same thing that Israel does. They shouldn't put their military structure in civilian areas. The Israelis are using human shields. And quite frankly, when it comes to attacks, intentional or not, on civilian infrastructure, those are war crimes, period, no matter who commits them. So I have the same overall position about them, but only in the past 2 days have people suddenly gotten concerned about the bombing of hospitals in the Middle East. That's been going on since, October 15th of 2023. But once Iran does it, now it's time to eradicate them from the map.
Can you justify October the 7th by the Palestinian state? No. Because people talk about this two-state solution. That's nonsense. There's been a two-state solution that's been around since 2005. It's called Gaza. And you can see what they did with their state at that time. And you look at October the 7th.
Gaza was never a state. It was certainly not the state that the UN and the people who would become the Israelis agreed to in 48. It was never a state. It had none of the attributes of a state. For example, it was subject, as soon as Hamas took over or won the election, depending on how you view it, it was subject to consistent and continuous Israeli isolation and blockade. It became sort of the world's largest open air prison. But if you're asking me, is October 7th justified? Is it justified to deliberately murder civilians or even recklessly murder civilians while you're shooting people who are members of the military? The answer to that is, of course, no. And Hamas, as a actor under those circumstances, in clear violation of international law, I mean, Israel had the opportunity to say, look what has happened and look at the people who did it. Let's rejoin the International Criminal Court. Let us rejoin the family of nations and these international institutions. Let us have warrants of arrest issued for all members of the Hamas regime who participated in this in any capacity whatsoever. And let us reserve the right to engage in targeted assassination of anybody who participated. And let's get serious about an actual two-state solution, because this clearly isn't working. That was an option Israel had. That was never anything Netanyahu was going to do. And instead, he engaged in the maximalist strategy of, this is now our opportunity. It's our opportunity to expel Palestinians from the West Bank through state-sponsored settler terrorism, which we're doing. It's an opportunity to level Gaza, turn it into an unlivable parking lot, and get rid of 2 million Palestinians there. And it's our opportunity to attack, the most feared country in the Middle East, Iran, after the United States ended taking out Saddam Hussein, who was the former Hitler. Now Iran is now the new Hitler. And that was the strategy that Netanyahu chose. He certainly has the support of the Israeli people. They elect him over and over again. They elected him this time. And unfortunately, there will be tragic and horrific consequences to those decisions, as there are even as we speak.
The elimination of the Islamic regime in Iran may end a lot of the aggression in that whole area.
Okay.
Do you think?
I remember when, so long ago, was the turn of the last century, and the neocons, who have now been denounced by Donald Trump in one of the policy positions I actually agree with, the neocons and the progress for roadmap for a new century, they all laid it out. Once we invade Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein and engage in regime change, everything will change. Everybody will sit down, come to the table. We'll all have peace and love. We just have to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And that worked out just great. And of course, the West has been saying that about the Middle East forever. And they have never been right. So
do you honestly believe that Israel is being treated fairly in the media and by the international community? Do you really believe that?
Well, I guess fairness is a construct of what it is you're doing. So for example, if my client is accused, mind you, of going out and committing indiscriminate mass murder against civilians, okay, that's Ron Kuby's client, and he says, I'm justified in that. They were trying to kill me. Chances are, after, 10 or 100 or 1,000 dead children that he's killed, preemptively, of course, the media is going to be critical of him, right? Now, is that unfair, given the fact that, he's killed 1,000 children, or in this case, 50,000 Palestinians? Is that unfair? I don't think it's unfair. I can understand why I'm trying to change the narrative, which Israel has done a fairly good job of doing here in the United States, in terms of basically making it almost impossible to criticize the state of Israel without being called a supporter of Hamas, a supporter of terrorism, and an anti-Semite, even if you're Jewish, like me.
Do you at least give some credence to the fact that since 1948, the Arab, and I use that word broadly, have never agreed to sit down and make peace with the Israelis? Never. In all these years, they've refused to even recognize the state.
That is simply not accurate.
Yes, it is.
We came close with Yasser Arafat and the Camp David Accords. It didn't come close enough, unfortunately, because the Palestinian state that would be created, again, lacked the attributes of a state. It lacked actual sovereignty. We might look back at that now the same way we look back at 1948 and say what an opportunity that was lost. And, we can debate that back and forth. But the idea that the quote unquote Arabs have never been willing to negotiate with Israel is palpably untrue. And in fact, many Arab nations actually made treaties with Israel and signed various types of peace agreements with Israel. Although those are, of course, jeopardized now by what Israel is doing.
But the reality is, can you in some way justify the fact that the Palestinian Authority is totally corrupt and they pay people for killing Jews? They absolutely pay it. And we and the Biden administration were financing it. So how can you ignore that?
Actually, most of the money that's going to pay to kill people comes from the United States to Israel. Does the Palestinian Authority, which is not Hamas, I'm not actually current on what their status is with respect to combatants who are killed, because the Palestinian Authority takes the position that they are not at war with Israel. I mean, I know Hamas would pay the families of the quote unquote martyrs who in fact participated in actions against Israel. And frankly, I mean, I know it's nobody wants to think of them the same way we think of us, but we pay pensions to families too when their loved ones are killed, like in Iraq, killing Muslims. The United States is paying families of people who killed Muslims in Iraq. That was all based on a lie. Okay, I could do that too, but does that really take us anywhere outside of more bile and outrage and those people kind of stuff? It doesn't, Judge. It just doesn't.
Well, let's move on to the free speech.
Oh, we're going to move past Israel finally. That's rare.
Well, look, it's the hot topic. It's a hot topic for today. You can put aside the economy. You can put aside the economy and appointees and policies and all the rest of it. What
concerns the American people absolutely the most, what concerns every housewife in rural Iowa is, are we doing enough to take care of Israel? But yeah, we can talk about another topic.
You think we're doing too much?
I think I made myself pretty clear on this. Let's move.
Yeah, on. I think. In fact, I truly rarely, in all the years I've been doing this, rarely render any kind of an opinion. I'm truly a neutral in most things. On this subject, I'm not neutral.
I could tell.
So, well, look, I'm trying hard to be balanced, but I'm not. I mean, when you look at the accusation that Israel is an apartheid state is ridiculous. There's no credence to support that whatsoever.
Okay, let's try this then, Judge. You say it's ridiculous to call it an apartheid state.
Yes, I do.
Let me tell you things that I think you'll agree with because they're indisputable. Right now, Israel occupies land on which about 4 million people are living. We'll call them Palestinians. You can call them the Arabs if you wish. The people on that land have no civil rights. That is to say, they have no say in their form of government.
And maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they shouldn't. Occupied is a very sophisticated word.
Yeah.
How do you support historically, the right of people to live in places that they never had before and that they've taken over by force?
Stick with the apartheid thing now.
Okay.
So these 4 million people have no say of any kind in their form of government. They have no civil rights except those that are granted to them by the military. And they only the human rights that are granted to them by the military. That sounds like an apartheid system in the sense that the land of Israel, the citizens of Israel, are ruled in a more or less democratic way. but the land that Israel has taken over and administers, has conquered, whatever, the people there have no rights at all. And so much like South Africa, where you had a white minority taking over large numbers of black citizens who have no rights except the rights the white people give them. To me, I think, while apartheid is a little ahistorical, I think that it's not an unreasonable comparison. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Because Israel is the most diverse of all countries in the entire Middle East. They have all kinds of people. 20% of the population is Muslim, and there's no distinction between anybody. Anybody could be a citizen. But if you go to some of the Arab countries, they don't allow the women to even drive. So
Well, okay.
talk about apartheid. I don't think that's even an arguable issue. And by the way, your comment that Israel has taken over is an assumption that's not supported by any of the facts.
Oh yeah, well, so they conquered in the 1967 war, in the 6-Day War.
But they shouldn't have to conquer anything if you
Okay,
assume that they conquered it.
I mean, Judge, maybe the Zionists claim they should take it over. By God, that's part of our historical patrimony. I remember back 3,000 years ago, or maybe I don't. But they did conquer it. They did take it over. And now the Israeli government administers that, and the 4 million people who live there have no say in how they're ruled. Now, if you don't want to call it apartheid, call it something else, but it is far removed from anything that is acceptable under basic democratic norms of human behavior.
Well, I just want to conclude. It's a very interesting conversation. and even though I don't agree with you, I respect your opinion for sure. I always listen, and the reality is we don't agree. But the fact of the matter is a country fighting for its own survival, literally survival, is given some license to do what's necessary to do to protect themselves from being annihilated. If you look at the charter from Hamas, right, it says never give 1 inch to Israel, not 1 inch. How do you negotiate with people like that?
Well, okay, there's a few things there, Judge, but let's sort of take it back to your first statement. Because let's face it, countries that are facing a threat to their survival, actually facing an existential threat, we will be destroyed unless we act. Those countries will always, and those people will always act with the maximum possible force without regard to how many babies, children, pregnant mothers they kill because they are fighting for their survival. So let me ask you, do you think that Israel on October 8th was in any danger of being overthrown by Hamas? Do you really think that on October 8th, after this attack, and after it had been thoroughly repelled, although with horrific casualties, do you actually think that Hamas was then going to march into Tel Aviv, raise the green flag, and begin the process of mass murder of Jews? Because if you actually believe that, you're kind of ignoring the most powerful military in the entire Middle East.
Well, I'm not going to respond to that, but I can tell you that you don't know, or actually you do know, what was going to come next. The threat was there, the death was there, the destruction was there, and you know that these people were hell-bent on destroying the state. You don't sit back and let it happen the second time.
Doesn't it depend on capacity, though? I mean, the grasshoppers may unite against the lawnmower en masse. But when that old lawnmower gets going, it doesn't matter how much the grasshoppers hate the lawnmower, you know?
Well, anyway,
it's not really
we could
they hated me, so I'm going to run them all over.
Well, we could go on with for a long time. The fact of the matter is, we know as lawyers that you have to rely on the facts, and the history provides us with those facts. And some of those facts are undisputed. So let's leave it there between you and I. And the reality is, I feel very differently than you do. Right. But as I said a minute ago, I respect you, Ron. I don't agree with you, but I respect you. And that's why I've had you on the show. even though I knew in advance, because we've spoken before. I knew in advance you were going to be on one side, which is very different than other people we've had on the show. I wanted the public to hear it from you because they're entitled to hear both sides of any argument. And you're very eloquent and very convincing. I just don't think you're supported by the facts. But be that as it may, I want to thank you again.
Thank you.
I love having you on the show because you inspire me.
I come on, we'll have a chance to talk about something other than Israel.
It wasn't, you know what? I'm going to tell you something. It wasn't really, I sent you
I know you did.
Talking points.
I know.
And if you look at the 2 pages, there's very little reference to Israel.
I know.
In here.
But Judge,
we didn't even get to the other subjects, but
I understand
because it got started.
But
we went on a roller coaster.
Talking about Israel.
Yeah, you're right.
Never ends.
You're probably right. And I am absolutely 100% in favor of Israel. And I believe the facts and history supports and the evidence supports their position. You may disagree, which you do.
Judge, let me ask
and
you
that is what it is.
Question. What do you think the solution is? I'm assuming you don't favor the, mass murder of 4 million Palestinians, putting them into ovens and things like that. I'm assuming you don't favor ethnically cleansing them. That is like forcing them all out of their homes and into some country that doesn't want them the way the Jews have been. We Jews.
Well, I'm going to ask that from a spiritual standpoint. The only way we're going to have peace in the world is if we look internally at who we are and what we are doing to make happen what's happening. And the fact of the matter, everything is based on the law of cause and effect. And until people are willing to sit down and talk to each other and compromise and mediate, ain't nothing going to happen as long as these parties have taken the positions that they've taken. I believe Israel has the right to defend itself in whatever way it sees fit under the circumstances. They didn't think twice on the other side about killing, murdering, decapitating people or shooting bombs in from Gaza on a regular basis for no reason other than they wanted to get rid of their neighbors. So the bottom line is, it is what it is. We didn't really intend to spend the whole.
I just want to be clear. What you're saying is anything that Israel feels it must do, you're okay with.
I wouldn't say that because that's
totality. I know it kind of sounded like what you were saying there.
What they're doing, well, I'll tell you this: what they're doing right now, I do support, and I think that at some point, I hope that Trump just makes the right decision for our benefit, our being all of us,
into war with Iran. Yeah,
it may very well be part of whatever the dynamic is.
Be a move that Trump always said he would not take. He actually won election in part on the fact that a decent-sized chunk of the American people were tired of endless war, even though, it was the Bush administration that started Afghanistan and led us into the horror show of Iraq. Certainly it was maintained through successive Republican and Democratic administrations. And Trump said he was going to end all that. But I guess if it comes to supporting Israel, we're not going to hold him to his word there, because what could be better than putting U.S. troops in harm's way for the Israelis?
It's not for the Israelis, it's for the rest of the world.
Oh, it's for us.
America is the great Satan, and there's no denying what the intention is going to be, and you use whatever you have that you need to do to survive. And that's what this is about. It's called survival.
We're going to survive just fine, Judge. So it's not about our
anyway.
Anyway,
nice to talk to you, Ron.
You too. Take good care.
We'll do this again sometime.
Shalom, shalom. Bye.
Bye-bye.